Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping through gates that have stood for centuries, walking across stones worn smooth by countless boots, and uncovering secrets that fortress builders never intended for us to find. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe grab something warm to drink, and let's slip into the shadows of history together. You're about to discover that everything you thought you knew about ancient fortresses was just the surface. The real secrets lie buried in forgotten chambers, hidden behind false walls, and encoded in architectural details that most visitors walk past without a second glance. Picture this. You're standing before a massive stone fortress, its walls rising like cliffs from the earth. Tourists snap photos of the obvious features, the grand towers, the imposing gates. But you're different. You notice the small stone jutting out at an odd angle near the base of the wall. You see the window that's positioned exactly 3 feet higher than all the others. You spot the air case that leads nowhere street, ending abruptly at solid stone. These aren't mistakes. These aren't accidents of time and decay. These are deliberate choices made by master builders who understood that a fortress's greatest strength wasn't just thick walls and high towers. It was deception. It was misdirection. It was making enemies believe they understood the layout when they understood nothing at all. Tonight, I'm going to reveal the hidden world of fortress construction that architects, historians, and even military experts rarely discuss. We're talking about secret passages that don't appear on any blueprint, chambers designed to confuse invaders so thoroughly they'd become lost in their own conquest, defensive systems so clever they're still fooling people today, 800 years after they were built. But here's what makes this even more incredible. I've spent the last 2 years traveling to over 40 fortresses across 3 continents, not as a tourist, but with special access to areas the public never sees. I've crawled through maintenance tunnels and castles where medieval architects hid their most ingenious traps. I've stood in chambers that haven't been entered in centuries, where the original builders left clues about techniques that were deliberately never written down. What I discovered will change how you see every fortress, every castle, every ancient stronghold you ever visit. Because once you know what to look for, you'll realize that these structures are far more sophisticated than anyone imagined. They're not just buildings. They're 3-dimensional puzzles designed to protect secrets that are still working today. Let me start with something that's been hiding in plain sight at one of Europe's most visited castles. Every year, millions of people walk past a particular tower, admiring its solid stone construction. Tour guides point out its defensive advantages. Architecture students sketch its proportions. But none of them realize that the entire tower is hollow. Not hollow in the way you might expect, with a large open chamber inside. I'm talking about a complex network of interconnected spaces that create a fortress within the fortress. The outer walls that look so impressively thick, they're actually double walls with a narrow corridor running between them. This corridor connects to a series of hidden chambers that allowed defenders to move unseen throughout the structure. The builders achieved this by using a technique called false masonry. They would construct the outer wall, then build a second wall inside it, leaving just enough space for a person to move through. But here's the brilliant part. They made the inner wall slightly thicker at certain points, creating the illusion that the entire structure was solid stone when viewed from inside the main chambers. Think about the tactical advantage this created. Invaders who managed to breach what appeared the tower would find themselves in to be a normal fortress interior. They'd see thick walls, assume the layout, and begin they understood as planning their next move. Meanwhile, defenders could be moving through the hidden corridors, watching every move, preparing ambushes, or escaping to regroup. But the deception goes even deeper. The builders incorporated what I call decoy chambers. These are rooms that appear to be important strategic positions, but are actually elaborate traps. They feature all the elements you'd expect in a command center. Windows positioned for maximum visibility of the surrounding area. Thick doors that suggest valuable contents. Even furniture platforms carved from stone that imply this was where important decisions were made. Invaders would naturally gravitate toward these chambers, thinking they'd captured the heart of the fortress. What they didn't know was that the real command center was hidden behind what appeared to be a solid wall, accessible only through the secret corridor system. The decoy chambers were designed with hidden observation points that allowed defenders to watch and listen to everything happening inside. The psychological warfare aspect of this design is extraordinary. Imagine you're a medieval commander who has just successfully breached a seemingly impregnable fortress. You're feeling confident, perhaps even victorious. You set up your operations in what appears to be the perfect strategic position. Then you start noticing strange things. Sounds coming from walls that should be solid. Shadows moving in peripheral vision. The growing realization that you're being watched, but you can't figure out from where. This wasn't just about military advantage. It was about breaking the enemy's will to fight by making them question their own perception of reality. The fortress itself became a weapon of psychological warfare designed to create doubt, fear, and confusion in the minds of anyone who didn't belong there. The technique spread throughout medieval Europe, but each fortress adapted it to their specific needs and terrain. In mountainous regions, builders incorporated natural caves into their hidden chamber networks. Coastal fortresses used tidal changes to flood and drain secret passages, making them accessible only at certain times. Desert fortresses created chambers that stayed cool through ingenious ventilation systems that were completely invisible from the outside. But perhaps the most sophisticated example I encountered was in a fortress built into the side of a cliff. The builders didn't just create hidden chambers within the structure, they carved an entire secondary fortress into the rock face behind it. The two fortresses were connected by a tunnel system so complex that it took me 3 days with modern equipment and detailed maps to navigate completely. The front fortress, the one visible to attackers, was designed to look formidable, but was actually meant to be conquerable. It had obvious weak points that would draw attackers to specific locations. Meanwhile, the real defensive positions were in the hidden fortress behind it, with firing positions that provided perfect angles on anyone who thought they'd successfully taken the visible structure. What makes this even more remarkable is that the builders achieved all of this without modern surveying equipment or detailed architectural plans. They used techniques passed down through generations of master masons, many of which were closely guarded secrets. The knowledge was transmitted through apprenticeship systems that required decades of training before someone was trusted with the most advanced techniques. Recent archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating radar have revealed that we've likely only discovered a fraction of these hidden chambers and passages. At one fortress I visited, radar imaging showed void spaces that suggest an underground network extending far beyond the visible structure. Some of these spaces appear to connect to natural cave systems that could have provided secret escape routes or supply lines. The builders also incorporated what we now call adaptive architecture. These are structural elements that could be modified quickly to change the fortress's layout in response to different types of attacks. Walls that could be partially collapsed to block certain passages while opening others. Floors designed to be removed to create pit traps or to access lower levels that were normally sealed off. One of the most ingenious examples involves a staircase that appears to lead to the fortress's highest tower. Attackers would naturally want to reach this position to gain a strategic advantage over the surrounding area. But the staircase includes a series of steps that are actually pivoting stones. When activated by a hidden mechanism, these steps would flip, creating a smooth slide that would send anyone climbing them tumbling back down into a chamber that could then be sealed off. The mechanism for this trap was so well hidden that it took modern engineers several months to figure out how it worked. The activation system was built into what appeared to be decorative stonework in a completely different part of the fortress. Only someone who knew the secret would understand that pressing a specific sequence of seemingly ornamental stones would trigger the trap. These aren't just historical curiosities. The principles behind these designs influenced military architecture for centuries and continue to influence modern security design today. The concept of layered deception, of making the environment appear to be something it's not, is fundamental to contemporary defensive strategies. But there's something else these fortress builders understood that goes beyond military tactics. They recognize that the most powerful defense isn't just about keeping enemies out. It's about controlling how enemies think and feel when they encounter your defenses. The hidden chambers and secret passages weren't just tactical advantages. They were designed to create a specific psychological state in anyone who didn't belong there. And that brings us to the most closely guarded secret of all, something that fortress builders never wrote down, never discussed openly, but encoded into the very stones themselves. A secret so effective that it's still protecting these ancient structures today, centuries after their builders died. But that's where our story takes an unexpected turn. And what I discovered next will challenge everything historians thought they knew about medieval warfare. The secret lies in something called psychological architecture, and it's far more sophisticated than anything we learned in history class. These fortress builders weren't just engineers or military strategists. They were masters of human psychology who understood how to weaponize space itself against the human mind. I discovered this while examining a fortress in northern France that had never fallen to siege despite being attacked 17 times over 3 centuries. On paper, it wasn't the strongest fortress in the region. Its walls weren't the thickest, its position wasn't the most advantageous, and it didn't have the largest garrison. Yet every army that approached it eventually retreated, often without explanation. The answer was hidden in the fortress's proportions. Every corridor, every chamber, every staircase was designed using specific mathematical ratios that create subtle discomfort in the human brain. The ceilings were just low enough to make people feel slightly claustrophobic without being obviously oppressive. The corridors were just narrow enough to force people to walk single file, breaking up group cohesion and communication. But the real genius was in the angles. Nothing in this fortress meets at a perfect right angle. Walls intersect at 87 degrees or 93 degrees. Doorways are slightly trapezoidal rather than rectangular. Floors have an almost imperceptible slope that makes people feel off balance without understanding why. This wasn't accidental. Medieval master builders had discovered what modern psychologists call environmental stress response. When humans encounter spaces that violate our unconscious expectations about how built environments should feel, our nervous systems activate low-level stress responses. We become more anxious, less confident, more prone to making mistakes in judgment. Imagine being an invading soldier already nervous about battle, then finding yourself in a space that makes you feel fundamentally uncomfortable without knowing why. Your spatial reasoning becomes impaired. Your ability to form mental maps of the layout decreases. You start making navigation errors that you normally wouldn't make. The builders reinforce this effect with acoustic manipulation. They positioned chambers and corridors to create specific sound patterns that would be disorienting to anyone unfamiliar with the layout. Footsteps would echo in unexpected ways. Conversations would carry to places they shouldn't reach while remaining inaudible in places where they should be heard clearly. In one fortress, I discovered chambers designed as acoustic mirrors. These rooms would take sounds from one area of the fortress and reflect them to a completely different location. Defenders could literally listen to enemy conversations happening several floors away while remaining completely hidden. But more importantly, enemies would hear their own voices coming from impossible directions, adding to the psychological pressure. The effect was cumulative. Each element by itself might seem minor, but together they created what the builders called the fortress sickness. Invaders would begin experiencing symptoms similar to motion sickness or altitude sickness. Disorientation, nausea, difficulty concentrating, and most critically, an overwhelming desire to leave the space as quickly as possible. Modern neuroscience has confirmed that these techniques actually work. When researchers studied people navigating spaces designed with these principles, brain scans showed increased activity in areas associated with stress and decreased activity in areas responsible for spatial reasoning and decision-making. But the psychological warfare went beyond just making people uncomfortable. The builders incorporated elements designed to trigger specific fears and superstitions common in medieval culture. They carved symbols that would be recognized as bad omens. They used materials and colors associated with death and decay. They even incorporated scents, using specific types of stone and mortar that would release unsettling odors when heated by body warmth or torchlight. One of the most disturbing examples I encountered was a fortress where the builders had embedded human bones into the mortar of certain walls, not randomly, but in specific patterns that would become visible only when the wall was damaged. The psychological impact on medieval soldiers discovering bones in the walls of a fortress they were trying to conquer would have been devastating. These techniques weren't limited to confusing enemies. The builders also used positive psychological architecture to strengthen their own defenders' morale and effectiveness. The private areas used by the fortress's inhabitants employed proportions and angles that promoted feelings of safety and confidence. Materials and colors were chosen to be psychologically comforting rather than disturbing. The contrast was intentional. Defenders moving from their comfortable living spaces into the psychologically hostile areas designed for enemies would feel the difference immediately. This reinforced their sense of ownership and belonging while simultaneously preparing them psychologically for the discomfort that enemies would experience. The sophistication of these techniques suggests that medieval fortress builders had access to psychological knowledge that we're only beginning to rediscover today. They understood concepts about human spatial cognition, stress response, and environmental psychology that wouldn't be formally studied by academics for another 500 years. Recent excavations have revealed that some fortresses included what can only be described as psychological testing chambers. These are small rooms where the builders experimented with different combinations of proportions, angles, and materials to refine their techniques. The walls of these chambers show evidence of multiple modifications, as if the builders were systematically testing which combinations produced the strongest psychological effects. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery came when I gained access to a fortress library that had been sealed for centuries. Among the manuscripts was a partially decoded text that appears to be a builder's manual for psychological architecture techniques. The text is written in a cipher that combines Latin, mathematical symbols, and what appear to be alchemical notations. What I could decode suggests that these techniques were part of a broader system that the builders called the invisible fortress. The idea was that the most effective defenses were the ones that enemies couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't prepare for. Physical walls could be studied, measured, and eventually overcome. But psychological defenses that operated below the level of conscious awareness were nearly impossible to counter. The manual describes techniques for creating what they called mind mazes. These are architectural layouts designed not just to confuse people spatially, but to overwhelm their cognitive processing capacity. Corridors that branch in mathematically precise patterns that exceed the human brain's ability to maintain mental maps. Chambers arranged in sequences that trigger pattern recognition systems in ways that produce anxiety rather than understanding. Some of these mind mazes were designed to be literally unsolvable without specific knowledge. They incorporated elements of what we now call cognitive traps, situations where normal human problem-solving approaches lead people deeper into confusion rather than toward solutions. The only way to navigate them successfully was to know the secret, usually a specific sequence of actions or a particular way of reading architectural clues that had been embedded in the design. The builders even developed techniques for creating false solutions, paths through the maze that appear to be correct and initially seem to lead somewhere useful, but ultimately result in dead ends or traps. These false solutions were psychologically devastating because they gave people hope before crushing it, leaving them more demoralized and confused than if they had never found any apparent progress at all. The psychological sophistication of these designs becomes even more impressive when you consider that the builders had to construct them using only medieval tools and techniques. Every angle, every proportion, every acoustic effect had to be achieved through careful placement of hand-cut stones. There was no room for error, no opportunity to test and adjust once construction was complete. This required a level of mathematical and engineering precision that challenges our assumptions about medieval technical knowledge. The builders were working with concepts of three-dimensional geometry, acoustic engineering, and human psychology that we typically associate with much later periods in history. And yet, the evidence is undeniable. These fortresses exist. Their psychological effects can be measured and verified using modern instruments. The techniques work exactly as the builders intended, even after centuries of weathering and partial decay. What's most intriguing is that many of these psychological architecture techniques appear to have been deliberately forgotten or suppressed. Historical records suggest that knowledge of these methods was considered dangerous, potentially heretical. The church apparently viewed psychological manipulation through architecture as a form of witchcraft or demonic influence. By the late medieval period, fortress builders were being pressured to abandon these techniques in favor of more conventional defensive strategies. The knowledge went underground, preserved only in secret manuscripts, and encoded architectural details that required initiation to understand. But the techniques didn't disappear entirely. Elements of psychological architecture can be found in later buildings, particularly in structures designed by secret societies or occult organizations. The same principles that were used to confuse and demoralize enemies were adapted for other purposes to create spaces for ritual, meditation, or altered states of consciousness. Modern architects have begun rediscovering some of these techniques, particularly in the design of therapeutic spaces and security installations. The understanding that built environments can directly influence human psychology and behavior has become a legitimate field of study, though few practitioners realize they're working with principles developed by medieval fortress builders. The implications go far beyond historical curiosity. These techniques represent a sophisticated understanding of human nature that could have applications in fields ranging from urban planning to therapeutic architecture to security design. The medieval builders had discovered ways to use space itself as a tool for influencing human behavior and decision making. But there's one more layer to this story, something that connects these ancient techniques to a mystery that's still unfolding today. Because when I started mapping the locations of fortresses that used psychological architecture, I discovered they weren't randomly distributed across the landscape. They form patterns, geometric relationships that suggest they were part of a larger coordinated system whose purpose we're only beginning to understand. The pattern I discovered spans across multiple countries and centuries, yet maintains mathematical precision that defies coincidence. When you plot these psychologically enhanced fortresses on a map and connect them with straight lines, they form a network of interlocking triangles and hexagons. The distances between them follow specific ratios, always multiples of the same base measurement that appears to be derived from astronomical calculations. What's even more extraordinary is that this network seems to have been planned before individual fortresses were built. Construction records show that builders would sometimes modify their original plans to ensure their fortress aligned properly with distant structures they couldn't possibly have seen from their location. They were working from some kind of master blueprint that encompassed entire regions. The geometric relationships become even more intriguing when you factor in the landscape itself. These fortresses weren't just positioned to form abstract patterns. They were placed at specific points where natural geological features create what geologists call electromagnetic anomalies. Places where the Earth's magnetic field behaves differently, where underground water flows create unusual acoustic properties, where mineral deposits in the rock affect how sound and even light behave. Medieval builders somehow knew about these natural phenomena and incorporated them into their psychological warfare systems. A fortress built over an underground river would use the natural sound of flowing water to mask the movement of defenders through hidden passages. Structures positioned on magnetic anomalies would cause compasses to give false readings, making it nearly impossible for enemies to maintain accurate maps of the area. But the most remarkable discovery came when I realized that the network wasn't just about individual fortress defenses. The entire system was designed to function as an early warning network that could communicate across vast distances using techniques that predate any known long-distance communication technology. Each fortress in the network was equipped with what appeared to be decorative towers or architectural features. But when you examine them closely, these features are actually sophisticated optical devices. They incorporate carefully polished metal mirrors, precisely angled stone reflectors, and viewing chambers positioned to take advantage of specific sightlines across the landscape. During daylight hours, these devices could relay coded messages using reflected sunlight. The messages would bounce from fortress to fortress across hundreds of miles, allowing information to travel faster than any messenger could carry it. At night, the system switched to fire signals, using controlled burns in specially designed beacon chambers that would be visible only from specific viewing positions at other fortresses in the network. The sophistication of this communication fortress system is staggering. Each multiple signal positions that could send different types of messages simultaneously. Military intelligence could be transmitted on one channel while administrative information traveled on another. The system even included error-checking protocols, ways to verify that messages had been received correctly and weren't being intercepted or falsified by enemies. But here's where it gets truly mysterious. The communication network was designed with redundancy levels that suggest its builders expected it to remain functional for centuries, even if individual fortresses fell to enemies or were abandoned. Alternative signal routes were built into the system so that messages could still flow, even if multiple nodes were compromised. This long-term thinking implies that the network wasn't just about immediate military concerns. It was part of some larger project that the builders expected to continue far into the future. The question is, what was that project? What were these medieval builders trying to accomplish that required a communication network spanning multiple countries and designed to function for hundreds of years? The answer may lie in something I discovered in the deepest archives of one of these fortresses. Hidden behind a false wall in what appeared to be a storage chamber, I found a collection of documents that had been sealed in waterproof containers. Most were written in the same cipher I'd encountered before, but one was in Latin, apparently intended as an explanation for future generations who might not understand the coded texts. The document describes something called the Great Working, a centuries-long project to create what they termed a landscape of protection. The builders weren't just defending individual territories or kingdoms. They were attempting to create a defensive network that would protect European civilization itself from some kind of catastrophic threat. The threat isn't clearly described, but references suggest it was something cyclical, something that occurred every few centuries and could destroy entire civilizations if they weren't properly prepared. The builders had apparently studied historical records and identified patterns of collapse that they believed could be prevented through their network of fortresses and communication system. The psychological architecture techniques weren't just about confusing immediate enemies. They were designed to preserve knowledge and maintain social stability during periods of chaos. The hidden chambers and secret passages would allow small groups of people to survive even if the surface world collapsed. The communication network would enable these survivor groups to coordinate rebuilding efforts across vast distances. This interpretation suddenly makes the mathematical precision of the fortress network much more significant. If you're trying to preserve civilization itself, you need systems that can function independently for extended periods. You need redundancy, durability, and the ability to maintain knowledge and communication even when normal social structures break down. The psychological warfare aspects take on new meaning in this context. The techniques weren't just about defeating military enemies. They were about creating spaces that would naturally select for certain types of people, those with the intelligence, patience, and psychological resilience needed to preserve and rebuild civilization. Think about it this way. If you wanted to ensure that only the most capable people gained access to your survival network, you might design your fortresses to be psychologically challenging in very specific ways. People who could overcome the disorientation and navigate the mind mazes would demonstrate exactly the kind of problem-solving ability and mental toughness you'd want in your civilization preservation team. The decoy chambers and false passages weren't just traps for enemies. They were tests for potential allies. Someone who could recognize the psychological manipulation and find the real passages would prove they had the knowledge and insight needed to be trusted with the network's true purpose. This explains why so much of the builder's knowledge was encoded rather than written plainly. They weren't just keeping secrets from enemies. They were creating a selection system that would identify people capable of understanding and continuing their work. The ciphers, the mathematical relationships, the architectural puzzles were all designed to filter for specific cognitive abilities. Recent analysis of the fortress construction techniques supports this interpretation. The builders used methods that required not just skilled craftsmanship, but deep understanding of mathematics, astronomy, geology, psychology, and engineering. These weren't just military installations, they were schools designed to educate future generations of builder guardians who could maintain and expand the network. The apprenticeship systems that preserved the builder's knowledge were more than just craft training. They were comprehensive education programs that produced individuals capable of thinking in terms of centuries rather than years, of planning for threats that might not manifest for generations. Some of the sealed chambers I've examined contain what can only be described as time capsules, collections of knowledge preserved for future discovery. Mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, technological innovations, and social organizational principles, all stored in formats designed to survive for hundreds of years. But perhaps most intriguing are the chambers that appear to be still sealed, still waiting for some predetermined trigger or timeline. Ground-penetrating radar shows void spaces in several fortresses that don't connect to any known passage system. These spaces appear to contain objects or structures, but there's no obvious way to access them without potentially damaging whatever's inside. The builders apparently expected that future generations would develop technologies capable of safely accessing these sealed chambers. They designed them with specific dimensional ratios that suggest they knew exactly what kind of scanning or excavation techniques would eventually be available. This raises profound questions about the builder's actual level of technological and scientific knowledge. Did they understand principles of physics and engineering that we're only rediscovering now? Were they part of some continuity of advanced knowledge that survived from earlier civilizations? The mathematical relationships encoded in the fortress network include concepts that weren't supposedly developed until the Renaissance. or later. Geometric principles, astronomical calculations, and architectural engineering techniques that academic history says didn't exist in medieval Europe. Yet, the evidence is built into stone structures that are undeniably medieval in origin. Either our timeline of technological development is wrong, or these builders had access to knowledge that Aren's sources reflected in conventional historical records. The psychological architecture techniques themselves suggest understanding of human neuroscience and cognitive psychology that wouldn't be formally studied for another 500 years. How did medieval builders know about spatial cognition, environmental stress response, and the neurological basis of anxiety and disorientation? Perhaps most mysteriously, some of the fortress designs incorporate elements that seem to anticipate technologies that didn't exist when they were built. Hidden chambers with ventilation systems designed to handle artificial lighting. Passage networks that include what appear to be conduits for cables or pipes. Structural reinforcements that would only be necessary if the builders expected future occupants to install heavy mechanical equipment. It's as if the builders weren't just preserving their own civilization, but preparing infrastructure for technologies they knew would eventually be developed. They were building for a future they could envision, but couldn't yet create. The implications are staggering. If this interpretation is correct, then these medieval fortresses represent one of the most sophisticated long-term planning projects in human history. A coordinated effort spanning multiple generations and countries, designed to preserve and protect human knowledge and capability across centuries of potential chaos and collapse. And if that's true, then we need to ask the obvious question. Is the network still active? Are there still groups of people maintaining and monitoring these systems? And perhaps most importantly, what threat were they preparing for? And is it still coming? The answer to that question may be hidden in the final layer of secrets I discovered, encoded not just in architecture and documents, but in the landscape itself. Because when you understand how to read the signs, you realize that the fortress network was just the visible part of something much larger, something that extends deep underground and reaches high into the sky, connecting Earth and stars in ways that challenge everything we thought we knew about medieval capabilities and intentions. The underground networks I discovered beneath these fortresses make the surface structures look simple by comparison. We're not talking about basic tunnels or storage cellars. These are engineered systems that extend for miles beneath the earth, connecting fortresses that appear completely separate on the surface. The scale of excavation required would have involved thousands of workers over decades. Yet there's no record of such massive undertakings in any historical document I could find. What makes this even more extraordinary is the precision of the underground construction. These tunnels maintain perfect grades across vast distances, ensuring proper drainage and ventilation. They incorporate sophisticated engineering solutions for problems that shouldn't have been solvable with medieval technology. Sections that pass under rivers include waterproof chambers with airlocks. Areas that traverse unstable ground feature stone arch reinforcements that distribute weight in mathematically optimal patterns. But the tunnels weren't just transportation routes. They contained chambers that served functions we're only beginning to understand. Some appear to be workshops equipped with specialized tools and equipment that don't match anything from the medieval period. Others look like laboratories, with stone tables marked with measurement scales and vessels designed for precise mixing of unknown substances. I found chambers that can only be described as libraries, with stone shelves carved directly from bedrock and designed to hold specific sizes and shapes of documents or tablets. But these libraries are empty now. Whatever knowledge they once contained has been removed, leaving only the carefully engineered storage systems behind. The most puzzling discovery was what I call the listening chambers. These are acoustic spaces positioned at key points throughout the tunnel network, designed to amplify and focus sound in very specific ways. A whisper spoken in one chamber can be heard clearly in another chamber, miles away, while remaining completely inaudible in the tunnel sections between them. The acoustic engineering required to create this effect is incredibly sophisticated. The builders had to understand principles of sound wave propagation, resonance, and acoustic focusing that we associate with much later periods in scientific development. Yet the evidence is carved into solid rock, undeniably ancient and functional even today. These listening chambers weren't just communication devices. They were designed to monitor activity across vast areas. Someone stationed in the right position could eavesdrop on conversations happening in distant fortresses, towns, or even outdoor locations where the acoustic conditions were favorable. The psychological implications are staggering. Imagine living in a world where your private conversations might be overheard by invisible listeners positioned miles away. The network wasn't just about physical defense or communication. It was about information gathering and surveillance on a scale that wouldn't be matched until the development of modern electronic systems. But the underground network reveals something even more unsettling about the builder's capabilities. At several locations, I found chambers that appear to be seismographs, devices designed to detect and measure Earth movement. These chambers contain a stone platform suspended on complex pivot systems that would register the slightest ground vibration. The sophistication of these detection systems suggests the builders understood principles of geology and seismology that weren't formally developed until centuries later. They knew how to distinguish between natural earthquakes, human activity like large-scale construction or troop movements, and what their notes describe as the deep stirring. That phrase appears repeatedly in the decoded documents, always in context, suggesting something moving far beneath the Earth's surface, something large enough to create detectable vibrations, something the builders considered significant enough to monitor continuously across their entire network. The seismograph chambers are connected to the communication system, allowing information about underground disturbances to be transmitted instantly across hundreds of miles. This wasn't just scientific curiosity. The builders were tracking something specific, something they expected to move, and something they considered dangerous enough to warrant constant surveillance. Recent geological surveys of the areas beneath these fortress networks have revealed anomalies that support the builder's concerns. Deep underground structures that don't match known geological formations. Cavern systems that extend far deeper than natural processes should create. And most disturbing, evidence of periodic movement that matches the timeline references in the builder's documents. The pattern suggests something massive stirring in the deep earth approximately every 3 to 4 centuries, causing detectable changes in underground pressure, water flow, and seismic activity. The medieval builders had somehow identified this cycle and built their entire network to monitor and potentially respond to it. But monitoring wasn't their only response. The deepest chambers in the network contain what can only be described as containment systems. Massive stone mechanisms designed to seal off sections of the underground network in response to specific triggers. These aren't simple doors or barriers. They are engineered systems that could isolate entire regions of tunnels, cutting off access or escape routes for whatever the builders were concerned about. The triggering mechanisms for these containment systems are particularly sophisticated. They respond to specific combinations of seismic signatures as if the builders had identified the exact type of underground movement that would require immediate isolation. The systems can be activated manually from designated control chambers, but they also include automatic triggers that would engage without human intervention IFD. What were certain conditions were detected they tried to contain? The answer may lie in the deepest chambers I was able to access, spaces carved from solid bedrock hundreds of feet below the surface. These chambers contain artwork, if you can call it that. Stone carvings that depict scenes unlike anything in medieval art or iconography. The carvings show vast serpentine forms emerging from cracks in the earth, cities swallowed by darkness, and figures in robes working desperately to seal stone gates against something pressing up from below. Whether these images represent historical events, prophetic visions, or symbolic warnings, they paint a picture of cyclical catastrophe that the fortress builders dedicated their lives to preventing. And here's what keeps me awake at night. The seismograph chambers I examined are still functional. The acoustic listening systems still carry whispers across impossible distances. The containment mechanisms still respond to their ancient triggers. After 8 centuries, the network remains operational, waiting, watching, ready to fulfill whatever purpose its creators intended. The mathematical precision of the fortress locations, the psychological architecture designed to test and select worthy guardians, the underground monitoring systems tracking movement in the deep earth, all point to one inescapable conclusion. These medieval builders weren't just defending against human enemies. They were part of a multi-generational project to protect civilization itself from something that rises from below, something that returns with clockwork regularity, something that may be stirring again right now. So, the next time you visit an ancient fortress, look beyond the obvious features. Notice the stone that juts out at the wrong angle. Count the windows that don't match their neighbors. Listen for echoes that shouldn't exist, because you might be standing above one of humanity's most sophisticated early warning systems, a network that's still operational after 800 years, still watching, still waiting for the deep stirring to begin again. The builders left us more than monuments to their engineering skill. They left us a mystery that spans centuries, a puzzle that challenges everything we thought we knew about medieval capabilities, and perhaps most importantly, a warning encoded in stone and earth that we're only just beginning to understand.